Are you giving me a countdown or am I just on? Hi there, it's Dr. Nikki Freeman. We are so excited that you are tuning in again for our second debate of this year's Montgomery Cup British Parliamentary Debate Exhibition Series with the University of Central Missouri. Tonight we are at Edinburgh University, another fantastic program. They've been around for ages and are always one of the most competitive in Scotland and the United Kingdom. And we will be debating the resolution, "This House regrets the liberal media's significant use of mockery of Donald Trump." So it should be a very, very interesting debate tonight. And one of the really unique things that we notice when we are here overseas is the students here are very interested in our political system and also how we view our own political system and our political climate. So I'm sure that tonight is going to be a really exciting debate. Jack, do you have anything you want to add before we start?
Looks like they're getting the chambers ready. It will be interesting because Edinburgh University is the prime minister. So it's going to be interesting to hear, Scottish students talking about our, election process and Donald Trump. And
make sure your phones are on silent.
Right, because the prime minister's job is to set up or frame the debate. So ultimately, the debate is going to be framed by somebody who is actually not a citizen of the United States. So that could make things go in a very interesting and unique direction. But nonetheless, it's going to be a fantastic night. So in just a moment, we will be tuning into the debate and getting things started. I will just let you know that the prime minister role tonight is being filled by Georgia Bentley from Edinburgh University. And it looks like they're about to get started, so we'll turn it over there.
Hello, and welcome to this debate between Edinburgh Debates Union and the University of Central Missouri. I'm Bryn. I am the Public Events Coordinator for Edinburgh Debates Union, and I'd like to welcome all the debaters to this debate today, which will be on the topic that this House regrets the liberal media's significant use of mockery of Donald Trump. I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and I hope you have a great debate.
So we'll start off with the Prime Minister's speech, Georgia, for a speech that does not exceed 7 minutes. Hear, hear.
So I think it's fair to say, first and foremost, that as OG, we do not stand behind Trump as a president, and more specifically the alt-right and right-wing ideology he represents. We want to undermine his authority, decrease his influence within politics, and I think that should be the metric of this debate, whichever house proves to you that this is the most significant way to undermine his authority. We think crucially that mockery has the opposite effect. We think it pushes supporters towards Trump. We think it mobilizes the right wing, attracts voters, and removes any meaningful opportunities to actually call Trump out and tear him down. I think the greatest proof is that, look, we have been mocking Trump since the moment he entered the political scene, yet he still won the presidential election. He is currently going to be the GOP's presidential candidate for the next election. Therefore, it clearly hasn't worked, mockery, in terms of undermining his power, and we'll prove to you the reasons why. I think, first of all, in terms of a counterfactual, we'd much prefer a world where we have serious discourse around his policies, around him as a person, just debating them in a way that's much more serious and less to do with mockery, because let's characterize mockery for a second here. We think mockery is all about making a joke at the expense of someone else. We think it's more of a personal attack in terms of like, which is distinct from having a debate. We think the personal attack tends to be on their character, tends to be on their appearance. We think we think it's very belittling to this person. You seek to put them down. It's a point where you say that you're not even worth debating. We're just going to take the piss out of you. We think that in doing so, you don't take them seriously. And also crucial about mockery, like it's not guaranteed to be funny. Therefore, a lot of those benefits that OO might talk about are not always guaranteed and not always there to begin with all those other harms we talked about. So we think first and foremost does is alienates a lot of Trump's support base. Crucially, support bases that can flip electoral results. So here are these. We think these are people that are not necessarily ideologically driven, but they stand behind like what Trump represents, the person. These are people like blue-collar workers who in the past have supported Democrats. However, in recent years have felt they've been neglected through neoliberalism, things like free trade agreement like NAFTA, that they have turned against the Democrats and seen as like elitist and not really against them. I think also that crucially means that these people are not like inherently identified with the right wing. They can be flipped in either way. Therefore, it's important that we don't push them towards Trump if you want the Democrat president to ever come about. I think then, so therefore, what resonated with them was this anti-establishment rhetoric of Trump. It wasn't necessarily his policies. It was this like rhetoric of what he wasn't sort of thing. I mean, so he didn't really have so when he doesn't have a policy platform, what people become attracted to is the values. It's to him. You know, he says, I alone can fix it. It wasn't necessarily people voting for the Republicans. It was voting for him. And they attached their identity and their values to him as a person. I think, therefore, crucially, when you attack him and you mock him as a person, this is seen as a personal attack on these people that support him. It's not seen as them like debating like these policies and the pros and cons. They are attacking a person they stand behind and support. He's almost like a demagogue figure as opposed to it. Therefore, we see this as incredibly antagonistic. Because also, I think what's crucial to note is that these people who can be swaying are probably open to a debate in general terms. However, when you mock someone, you're saying you're not even worth debating. Your opinions aren't to be taken seriously. I think it's important to note that these people voted for Trump in the first place because they feel they're being ignored by the establishment. Therefore, if you'll now ignore them even more by mocking them and not even allowing for discourse around their views, it's just going to push them further towards Trump and alienate them crucially. I think the comparative here is attacking the policies of Trump. In a much more serious way. And I think it's also really important here because a lot of his policies aren't necessarily to the benefit of the people that support him. For people that are working class, these blue-collar workers, when Trump tries to like repeal Obamacare, then this isn't necessarily in their interest. Therefore, if you frame this debate or serious discourse in their interest, saying, look, no, thank you, these policies are not in your interest, these are not a good thing, then you're more likely for them to be like, to recognize this and just take it more seriously. Yes, I will take closing.
Does this mockery from the media specifically come at the expense of serious discourse?
Yes, I think it does, for reasons I'll explain later. I think, secondly, it massively mobilizes the right. I think when you mock someone, because it's seen as such a personal attack, because again, I think the right wing expect disagreement for the left, but I don't think they expect this personal mockery attack. Therefore, it's going to produce greater backlash, we think. Because again, anger is the best way to increase the movement's momentum and get people fired up. This looks like increased voter turnout, especially when we consider like the US midterms. The only people that ever turn up to vote are people that are angry with the status quo. If you tend to be like happy or mild, you don't tend to like turn up to the events. We think it has greater turnout at rallies, and not just turnout, but like greater energy at these rallies, because these people are angry and they're more likely to turn out and thing. And it also, I think it feeds into this right-wing narrative that's already there about like how they were able to portray themselves as victims. They now say like, look, the left, they're too scared to debate us. Oh, look, they're smarter than us. They're locking us out of debate. This kind of anti-establishment rhetoric is suddenly becomes legitimized and gives them a basis to do so. Bear in mind, this is the basis that Trump ran his election on, and also will resonate with the population that do feel ignored, going, oh, okay, these people that are anti-establishment, they're more likely to support me in a world where I don't feel like my opinions are being misrated. I think, thirdly, then, it gives him great media attention and publicity that isn't necessarily a good thing. Because, again, I think when you use, like, sound bites in media, it is more likely to go viral, and, like, it does what engages people and interests them. But we don't see this as necessarily a good thing, because all you're doing is increasing his publicity for free, bear in mind, and you're just giving him, like, greater celebrity status and greater clout, which means people are just more likely to vote for him. Because I think people vote for who they know, like people such as like look at like other people that are currently doing well in the Democratic primaries, people like Biden, like Bernie, who already are like well known in these figures, apart from other ones that are less well known. Therefore, I think when people know them, they're more likely to vote for them. Also, I think it's more likely to attract donations from big companies, things like super PACs, because they are always going to stand behind someone that have a chance of winning, who they know. If you think of like Bloomberg, he never would have come as far as he did without a lot of money built into his campaign. Therefore, if you give him all this free publicity and donations into his campaign, we think that's terribly like a bad thing and only increases the chance of success. I think there is no such thing as bad publicity publicity, and just getting your name out there and getting your face known can do masses for a campaign. No, thank you. I think fine again about this wasted media attention. Look, I think there's a misconception that everything Trump says is completely irrational and we can dismiss it all. I think most of his speeches tend to sound quite reasonable, he's charismatic. The problem is that CNN spend all their time, all these newspapers spend all their time just trying to find the worst bits that make him the least bad, because that's their incentive. I don't think you can have a serious debate alongside a soundbite that completely takes the mick out of this person and makes him look so ridiculous that he's not even worth debating, and then be like, okay, let's have a serious debate about these policies. Because let's think about the actual types of mockery there is in the media. It's not these intellectual, informative mockery and good wit. The vast majority of this is taking the mick out of his small hands, his orange skin. These aren't informing the population in any sense of the word, because they have an incentive to maximize their views, increase publicity, and that's not going to necessarily do so if they go for the reverse. I think instead it also means that for people watching those speeches, they are less likely to recognize what is harmful in his speeches, because you don't have CNN calling him out and saying this is bad, this policy is bad, because they're spending all this time on these sound bites. Therefore, when people actually watch this, they watch his speeches, they are unlikely to recognize that. For those reasons, proud to propose.
And that was Georgia Bentley from EU representing the Prime Minister. And she set up a fantastic debate, and I think it'll be really interesting to see where this goes from here. Next up is Ryan Hill from UCM as the leader of the opposition.
Okay, first I'll move into a little bit of rebuttal, and then I'll go down to my positive matter. So first, we're arguing the resolution. This House regrets the liberal media's significant use of mockery of Donald Trump. Let's move down the government's case. Under their point on serious discourse, not mockery, they said that mockery comes at the expense of serious discourse. I have a couple of arguments to this. First of all, political satire has existed for a very long time and will continue to exist. Political satire is not a new thing, and mockery is not necessarily worse than anything else. And second, on the point of mockery comes at an expense of serious discourse, when we look at insulting or making light of mockery, I'd like to define mockery for us today. Mockery, the act of insulting or making light of a person or thing. By insulting or making light of Trump's harmful rhetoric or behavior, we delegitimize these harmful acts. We delegitimize the racist, sexist, and ableist rhetoric and apply critique that we can use to have a better future. So when we look at serious discourse, not mockery, mockery is a critique and it comes to serious discourse. Let's move on to their point of media attention and publicity. They talked about how media attention is not good because it increases the publicity. More people know Trump, therefore more people will vote for Trump. They don't just hear his name, they're hearing the bad actions that are associating with him, and they're hearing the critiques placed on Donald Trump by the liberal media. Let's look at more women were in the House in 2018 because we called out Trump's harmful behavior and because they were not complacent within the status quo. Let's move on to my case. I'll take you at the end of my flow. Moving on to more definitions. First, we'd like to define this House as U.S. constituents. We talked about mockery, and let's look at liberal media, an editorial policy in the U.S. that advocates on behalf of the Liberal Party. I'll take closing.
Yeah, you make a bold statement saying that the reason why women got elected was because of the mockery. What kind of link analysis do you have to suggest that women were put into power specifically because of that?
We're looking at more women wanted to be in the House, more women were involved because we wanted to speak out against these harmful statements, specifically against Trump and his sexist statements on women. Let's move on to my main points. Let's look at the first one of accountability, the second one of women's rights, and the third one of freedom of speech, which my partner will bring up in his DLO speech. Let's look at accountability. By use of mocking, the huge achievement of the liberal media is a sense of accountability. This lets us address the issues of the problematic actions of Donald Trump. The use of mockery also keeps U.S. constituents accountable. By speaking out and expressing our opinions, we show that we are not complicit. It is not enough to silently disagree. We must speak up. And by agreeing with the government that we regret the liberal media's voices, we take a step backwards in multiple ways. This brings us to my second point of positive matter, women's rights. One of the biggest and most far-reaching things to come out of the critique of Trump and the administration as a whole is the #MeToo movement in the United States. The MeToo movement is a social media movement in the U.S. that involves women speaking out about their sexual violence experiences. This movement was incredibly popularized after the sexual assault allegations against Trump were raised. And because of the critiques of Trump in the liberal media, we're looking towards giving those women a voice back in the United States who have been at a disadvantage and have been silent for far too long. The Me Too movement is a critique which comes out, which mockery leads to critique and leads to more political discourse. So because of the critique on Donald Trump, with specifically the critique on Donald Trump of the sexual allegations, we're looking at the Me Too movement becoming incredibly popularized. By agreeing with the government that we regret this, we hurt the legitimacy of the Me Too movement and the voices of women as a whole. The critique of Trump by the liberal media works to give women their voices back. Women's rights are human rights, and it's time to listen to what they have to say. When we look at today, we look at the accountability by use of mocking and the achievement. When we look at accountability and being held accountable for our actions and our speaking, not only are we looking at holding Donald Trump accountable for his actions, his voices, and his rhetoric, we're looking at holding the people of the United States accountable. When we're looking at mockery leading to better critique and leading towards positive discourse, we're looking at holding all of us accountable, as well as Donald Trump and as well as our government. When we look at women's rights, we're looking at giving women their voices back. So what have we heard today? We've heard that the significant use of mockery of Donald Trump by the liberal media has worked to give women back their voices and worked to hold both Donald Trump and the United States constituents as a whole accountable. With that, I concede the rest of my time.
And that was Ryan Hill as the leader of the opposition, setting up some pretty great rebuttal against the Prime Minister and advancing the leader of the op's case. We now turn it over to Karis Walsh, who is the Deputy Prime Minister, whose job is to rebuild the Prime Minister's case.
Okay, first I'd like to address a bit of direct rebuttal, then I'm going to move on to a bit of rebuilding of my partner's points, and then I'm going to expand on some more points and also preempt a few of the clashes of this debate that we think are going to be important. Okay, so firstly, I think it's important to acknowledge that Me Too is generally serious in its critique, so we think that the entire point about women's rights essentially falls out of the debate once you realize this. Also, most of the mockery of Donald Trump in terms of making fun of the fact that he's like grabbing women's genitals. Generally, this is seen in quite bad taste, and usually people who respect survivors of sexual assault do not engage in this kind of mockery because it's kind of insensitive, generally speaking. Okay. Firstly, I'd like to address the kind of central clash of accessibility that we think is going to come in later on. Next, I'd like to talk about why mockery gives worse substantial policy critique than more serious coverage, and why these two are somewhat mutually exclusive. Then I'm going to move on to why substantial policy critique is an important and badly needed in Trump's case specifically. And then very lastly, I'm going to talk about how mockery can alienate marginalized groups. So firstly, I'd like to talk about accessibility. So when we're talking about accessibility, we're usually talking about the types of people and the quantity of people that are able to access your form of media, and not just access in a very direct sense, but also access in terms of being able to understand it and being able to engage with it. So we're mainly talking about a quality versus quantity thing here. So on our side of the house, we think that the quality of the media is most important, whereas on other sides of the house, the quantity argument is likely to come up. So elections are often won on name recognition. I think this is important to talk about. So Joe Biden, for example, won Missouri yesterday, despite never having campaigned there, basically, because he has a huge amount of name recognition off the fact that he used to be VP. So the first thing to establish here is that Trump has always been essentially a brand. Secondly, I think it's important to acknowledge that in advertising, companies will literally pay millions to expose their brand to as many people as possible. And then thirdly, it is common practice for brands to become involved in controversy on purpose in order to capture public attention. So you can talk about Gillette or Nike or like every controversial Super Bowl ad that has ever existed. As a business person, Trump's obviously aware of this. So if mockery is especially accessible, you're admitting necessarily that its usage will necessarily expose more people, especially the politically disengaged, which Georgia has kind of characterized, to Trump's personal brand. There is no such thing as bad publicity in this regard, because critically, it exposes them to Trump's rhetoric without a substantial takedown of its material policy positions. Publicity without substantial criticism is a tacit endorsement. So Next, moving on to the necessarily analysis as to why mockery gives worse substantial critique than serious coverage. So the harsh reality here is that most humorous coverage of Trump does not revolve around his policy decisions. It usually revolves around the fact that he has orange skin, small hands, he has a lot of affairs, he doesn't respect women, orange man bad. While mockery and humor can have truth behind it, we do agree, and it can be substantial, this is just not the reality of mainstream liberal comedy like SNL or Jimmy Kimmel. So next, I'm going to move on to why this is somewhat mutually exclusive with serious critique. Firstly, because airtime is precious, right? So you have to decide who is getting the primetime slot. While serious and mocking coverage is not like completely mutually exclusive with mockery, we think that it should be prioritized heavily. And we think the fact that mockery has been used so wholeheartedly is responsible for the fact that we are quite lacking in a lot of substantial critique. So obviously as well, mockery and sound bites gain a lot of attention, and they can somewhat overshadow important policy positions and important like events that need to be basically assessed that are that materially affect people's lives, basically. And then the third reason why it's kind of mutually exclusive is because the incentives between making someone laugh is obviously going to be different from the incentive of informing a voter. I'll take a POI.
Can you elaborate on how mockery comes at an expense of serious discourse, how the two are mutually exclusive?
Because you only have so many primetime slots, basically, is that. And also, again, because the incentives are different. So if you prioritize funny coverage or mocking coverage, you're precluding a lot of important issues from getting highlighted by the mainstream media. So basically just kind of weighing this up a bit, on one side you have mocking coverage that offers like little to no policy critique, because usually this is what the coverage looks like, even if hypothetically it could involve substantial policy critique. And then on our side we have more dynamic, effective, and kind of like just generally more informative coverage that might actually sway voters. So moving on, why is substantial policy critique so important in Trump's case specifically? Firstly, because a lot of his policy proposals are so flawed that substantial critique is not difficult to communicate. So if we're talking about accessibility, debunking something like the wall not working is quite easy to do if you're just willing to disseminate the facts that a lot of illegal immigration is just visa overstays. So because it's so easy to take down, there's no particular reason why mainstream media would have trouble covering it, and have trouble covering it to a wide audience that includes people who aren't necessarily politically engaged. And then the second reason is because a lot of Trump's key supporters have interests that directly conflict with his policy proposals. So like a lot of working class, rural, white voters that vote for Trump are very reliant on the Affordable Care Act, but they actually literally, some of them just don't know that Trump wanted to repeal it in the first place. They were unaware of this. And if we expose this, we can rip away at least some of these core supporters, and we are willing to admit that, like, even if it's only a few of his supporters that happen to have watched CBS or like who have glanced at SNL before, as long as we win on the metric that we are converting some people and the other side aren't converting anyone through mockery, we still win the debate on this balance. And then lastly, mockery often alienates marginalized groups because not all of them particularly identify with the liberal idea that a lot of wealthy people have, that Trump's policy proposals aren't an existential threat to people's lives, but instead they're just kind of like a funny joke. Okay, Gov.
And that was Karis Walsh from EU, representing the Deputy Prime Minister, making some really great cases on accessibility and mockery, and basically the incentives to choosing mockery over information exchange in the media. So now we'll turn it over to Manny Reyes from the University of Central Missouri, who will build up the leader of the opposition's case once again and propose some positive manner on his own cases.
Okay, I'd like to extend a quick blanket of thank yous. Thank you for everyone being here and having a very educational debate, and thank you for hosting us. I really do appreciate it. I would first like to begin my speech with a couple points of rebuttal over our case, then respond to the Deputy Prime Minister before offering a brand new substantive point of matter, which would really put it over the edge and why you should vote in favor of the opposition bench. First, I'd like to discuss the argumentation coming out of the Deputy Prime Minister about the argumentation over women's rights. The only argumentation against Ryan's two main points of substantive matter was the articulation that the Me Too movement is very serious and how mockery isn't used. We like to say when you condemn it and this type of rhetoric being used and seeing these things as mockery, that is the thing that we are saying that is not worse. When we see women speaking out, they are seen as like they have to keep calm or they have to use a certain type of rhetoric or else automatically they are devalued. We see that whenever we decided to mock President Trump about this Me Too movement, we were able to catapult this movement into a more serious manner. But furthermore, I'd like to expand on the accountability argumentation that Ryan has put up and that the Deputy Prime Minister did not really respond to. The accountability issue is important, that we must hold Donald Trump accountable to his rhetoric and to his actions. I'll get to you in a second, when we use this mockery for Donald Trump, we make it seem that his racist remarks aren't true. Whenever we have this type of mockery, it actually delegitimizes this racism and sexism that we see from the President of the United States, and we actually be able to see it in a better light. Furthermore, we think this accountability point is important, but I'll get to my third standard point of matter in a second. Next, I'd like to respond to a couple of the arguments from the Deputy Prime Minister that was highlighted that don't really stand in this debate. Yes, I'll get the opening.
Look, on our side of the House, we can still call Trump out, we can still criticize him, however, in just a more serious way. What is unique about mockery and humor and belittling someone that is the only way to criticize him?
Yeah, I see a couple of things. I'll get on to that actually later on and when I answer some of the Deputy Prime Minister arguments. So I want to bring up a few main contentions about the Deputy Prime Minister. First, I like to articulate what actually regretting means. They discuss how they will convert voters if we say that we regret, and how regretting this mockery is actually important. But we see that this mockery and what regret actually means isn't what it comes out to be. They give you this type of solvency that they can garnish off, like they can get whenever we say we regret, but actually nothing changes. The only thing that changes is our perception, and if we say we regret this mockery, we regret holding our president accountable instead of just letting it go by. So essentially, there's actually nothing that comes out of the Prime Minister's speech, that either the Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister about what regretting actually means in context of the resolution, and we want to challenge the rest of the government bench to actually give us a good bright line of what regret means and what actually gets changed if we regret this. But furthermore, they discussed how accessibility, and this is one of the most important plans, but we actually articulate the other way. When we use a different type of condemnation and we use mockery, it lets us better access to voters who do not always understand this high-profile political talk. Younger voters who have historically used like memes and Reddit to put forth their ideas, this accessibility is easier for them and people who do not like to be involved in the political atmosphere. We can make light of President Trump's actions in a way that makes it more accessible. Furthermore, they say that how it's mutually exclusive. We say, I'll get to you later, I had a couple more stuff to get through. I say mockery is bad, that we don't say that, we get a couple of responses. One, it's not mutually exclusive. Secondly, we say this is a catapult. Whenever we have mockery, we are able to open the bridges and actually have this serious talk. Condemnation on a president that ignores all customs beforehand will not work. He calls out attacks. He uses this racist and sexist remarks that are completely against the rails. So why should we have to be very political in the way we condemn them? Why can't we use mockery, and why don't we actually delegitimize what they're saying instead of giving them their legitimacy and giving a platform for them to have? Finally, they say that any airtime is better than none. We actually have to articulate that, like, when we actually bring up this discussion, this is the best way to do this, and how, like, once again, we want to challenge the rest of the government bench to actually say how this is mutually exclusive, because when we have mockery, we can still seriously condemn President Trump's actions and rhetoric. But finally, I'll get to you later, I'm sorry, I have to get through a few more. Finally, I want to introduce the third and most important, one of the most important points in this in this debate, and that is of the freedom of speech within the United States. We say that this is good because the freedom of speech allows people to express their views in a way that other people can understand. Once again, go back to my articulation how younger voters use Reddit and other memes to actually express their political views, and they see that using like liberal media to express these views have been beneficial. They state that how this mockery has led to stronger base within the Republican Party and more right-wing extremists. We have to disagree with this articulation. We see that the mockery and this use of liberal media of President Trump, we have seen more and more progressive views come out forth. We saw 2018 of how we had the most women elected ever to the United States Congress. We see that people are not content with the status quo, and having this accessibility for everybody in ways that everyone can understand is going to be net better than coming out with this political talk and this idea that we need to seriously condemn his actions when he doesn't seriously he doesn't express himself in a serious manner. He can do whatever he wants and say whatever he wants. He literally said that he can go out and shoot someone on the street, and he will not lose voters. We see, why should we have to say we politically condemn you, but we can't mock him? Mocking is a great catapult. This is great to put forth this discourse. So at the end of the debate, we're going to see that we need to hold the president accountable. We need to uphold this idea of freedom of speech, and also keep in mind, we challenge the rest of the government bench, who's saying, what does regretting actually do? Regretting does nothing. But when we say, I think I flipped that. Whenever we say that we regret this use of mockery, then we can see this perception and all these other things I've discussed gets delegitimized. But when we don't regret it, we can see that we can hold them accountable, and we can uphold this freedom of speech, and we can continue to bring light to an unreasonable and unusual president.
And that was Manny Reyes filling the role of the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, advancing some really interesting material on accessibility of knowledge and information, and also bringing up a really important point of freedom of speech, which I think will become really important as we go down the table. So now we turn it over to Trenton Hawes, who will open up the second half, the bottom half of the debate.
So very briefly, I'm going to summarize top half of the debate, go into a little rebuttal of Manny's previous speech, and then extrapolate on two new unique points of positive matter for the government bench as to why you will be regretting the use of mockery of Donald Trump in the liberal media. But first, a summary of top half debate. My partner and I truly believe that top half of the debate has been so bogged down on the actual implications of Trump's policy and as if he's a good or bad person that we've missed what the actual mockery has been and what implications mockery itself has, not whether or not Donald Trump is a good or bad person. That will always supersede any kind of question. We agree with top half that Trump is a bad person that has done a lot of bad things. But rather, we need to look at the implications that the mockery has had on other people and how that affects the world that we live in. But for some brief rebuttal of the last argumentation coming out of government, Manny makes a couple of challenges for us to prove why the government bench has been correct. Well, we'd say the entire first two speeches from the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister prove why mockery has been ineffective and hasn't done anything to better the situation. Trump still got elected. Trump was impeached but wasn't found guilty. Like, there's been multiple instances where mockery has done nothing but rally Trump's base and make Trump be able to point out that they are the villain. They are making me look bad for no reason. Additionally, we still hold that there is a difference between mockery and criticism. Most of the entirety of top half debate has been why is criticism more important than mockery? But we need to look at the implications of mockery in and of itself. Which brings us to our first of two substantive points and why mockery is bad. And that's going to be our first one of soft power. We see that the United States has already been decked multiple times due to these forms of mockery in forms of soft power. Our ability to work in a multilateral world has continually gone down the more and more we delegitimize Trump's position by using mockery. We agree that using critical forms of Trump's policies and who he is as a person can be beneficial. But when we use mockery uniquely, other nations around the world can point to that as your own people don't respect you. They aren't able to actually hold you in any kind of regard. When you have videos from like Saturday Night Live of Trump sitting at like a child's play toy and sitting there messing around while Pence sits in the desk, we see that world leaders notice that. Saturday Night Live is kind of funny. People like to watch it. We see that these kinds of things happen time and time again, that they are able to then delegitimize the United States. And in a world where multilateralism is harder and harder to maintain, where we're fighting issues such as climate change, global security crises, aggression from multiple different nations, now is more crucial than ever to be able to work in a multilateral sphere. But additionally, it's not just Trump that gets affected. If this were to continue, or if this continues, or in a sense that we don't see some form of remorse, that it affects other presidents. That the office then becomes tarnished, that we delegitimize the office in and of itself. We can see this look in a way when we look to how we mocked President Barack Obama to President Donald Trump. That the mockery maintained between the two becomes a catalyst for further insecurity abroad. But what happens from this is that the world becomes a worse place. Things like being able to fight the wildfires in Australia with multilateral aid, issues of desecuritizing areas abroad, especially in Africa, become that much harder when nations don't respect respect the presidency, especially in the United States context. But there's another group of people who are dramatically hurt by this form of mockery. And that's what brings us to our second point, which is the portrayal of Trump and why it's uniquely bad. As I've alluded to, especially with the SNL skit that has Trump sit at child's play toy, the main way that we have mocked Trump is through showing that he is of a minority of sorry, I'm trying to be careful with how I phrase this. That we have shown and portrayed Trump with intellectual disabilities, that he is not bright at all, that he has the maturity and the intelligence of a child in the office. What this does uniquely is that it creates a sphere in where we target people with other disabilities. One of the largest platforms of the right wing has been they're portraying us as these kind of as people with these forms of disabilities, and mockery of these kinds of things becomes all that more important. When we look how Hillary Clinton called the Trump supporters the basket of deplorables, and then that mockery then transcended, we then had more and more people starting to be lumped together into larger categories. This led to targeting of these individuals, especially within the United States. These individuals were put at higher levels of risk. Additionally, it's not just intellectual disabilities. People with certain tics, whether they be nervous or speech impediments, also become more and more exacerbated. We all know Trump's iconic hand movements with the fingers out and the OK sign being portrayed. But that becomes all the more problematic because people start to latch onto those things as negative. Because you have a nervous tic, you shouldn't be pulled out. But additionally, these forms of mockery have also advocated for violence. We've seen comedians literally hold a decapitated Trump's head while holding like a blade. We see that these forms of advocating for violence become all the more prevalent towards other able people who cannot defend themselves, especially from groups like the alt-right, who then use this as a means to target other people. So what have I told you today? Two main things are coming out of this debate and why you're going to be voting for the government bench. One, that the use of mockery has become very problematic, that it is not doing us any good and it hasn't prevented anything before. Additionally, we see that the ability for us to work as a country, both domestically and internationally, is dependent on the legitimacy of the office. If we do not have that, we have no means of being able to even apply forms of critical policy as the top half of government outlines, or hold others accountable as the opposition outlines.
And that was Trenton Hawes advancing the government bench. We will now turn it over to Adam Malice, who will advance the side opposition bench, debating this House regrets the liberal media's significant use of mockery of Donald Trump.
Look, if Bobby Fischer tried to play chess with the pigeon would probably shit all over the boards, strut around, knock over all the pieces, and act like it won. Arguing with Trump is a little bit like this. Our case in CO is that the only way to beat the pigeon is to become the pigeon. This is what we're going to bring you today. OO brings you this case about how mockery leads to serious discourse. We're going to tell you about how we need mockery in its own right and how it's a beneficial tool in and of itself. That we need specifically to use mockery in order to combat the techniques used by Donald Trump, and that it's good in its own right for engaging a large group of moderates who will swing the election for us. OO talks about issues such as accessibility. We're going to tell you that within the context of a regrets motion, we're going to tell you why we think specifically we would prefer that people have chosen to use mockery, because we don't think it's about whether or not they have the option to. We think it's whether or not they should utilize that option. Their case is irrelevant in this regard. First of all, let's present to you our counterfactual, right? Because OG gives their counterfactual about how mockery comes at the expense of serious discourse. This is what they tell you. Keras justifies this with their only justification, telling you that they're competing with each other for airtime. We tell you that we're going to justify this more in our main case, but we think that these fundamentally are part of two different streams, right? And that mockery and serious discourse aren't competing for airtime for reasons I'm going to explain later. But we think that generally our counterfactual, no thank you, is that if you're not mocking Trump, then you're probably using that airtime in order to mock something else. Note this also takes out the CG case regarding disabilities, right? In that if they're not mocking Trump for his actions, they're probably just mocking someone else for their actions as well. You have exactly the same harms occurring. These are entirely symmetric and therefore not an advantage that they can take. Critically, we don't think that this debate is about mockery versus serious discourse. No thank you. We don't think this debate is about which of those two options is better. We think that this debate is about mockery in and of itself, in its own right, and whether or not that is a good thing and a tool that it is beneficial for the liberal media to use in order to combat Trump. We think you get the same amount of serious discourse either way. The debate is about whether or not mockery takes away from that or adds to it. No thank you. Okay, substantive now. First of all, let's characterize a certain group of people who we think are only going to engage with politics on a surface level, right? Because we're going to tell you that there's a substantial group of people who only engage with politics by things like watching Jimmy Kimmel, watching SNL, scrolling through meme pages on Facebook or Twitter or Reddit or whatever their preferred form of media is, right? We think that these people who are maybe unlikely to read manifestos, unlikely to watch debates, unlikely to engage in politics beyond this. Couple things to note about these groups of people. First of all, it's a massive quantity of people. Why is this? Because a substantial quantity of people are busy and don't have a whole lot of time to spare, and they probably prefer to spend this time watching comedic things as opposed to engaging with serious politics, because they try to unwind and have a respite from the stress of everyday life, which is relatively stressful actually. Second of all, we're going to tell you that the media has a massive reach, right? In that we were talking about giant conglomerates with the sole incentive of selling advertising by ensuring that they can keep people around to watch these advertisements by having entertaining shows. Therefore, they have this incentive to make millions of people watch these vast number of TV shows and news that they pump out in order to sell this advertising space. They've got a massive amount of reach to reach all these people. Second of all, we tell that these people are likely to be moderates and swing voters. Why is this? Because you think that if you are only engaging with politics on the surface level, this level of comedy and mockery, then you probably one, don't necessarily care about politics or have the interest in politics to delve deeper into it, and two, you haven't engaged with politics enough to form, no thank you, these incredibly strong opinions. These are people with looser opinions or no opinions at all because they don't have the time to form these opinions and they haven't spent the time to form these opinions and they don't care enough to engage on this deeper level, right? So we're talking a massive amount of people, and the people who specifically are going to swing various elections, no thank you. Okay, cool. Let's also add another article of framing here, which is kind of important. That mockery is the main tool that Trump uses in his arsenal, right? He talks about crooked Hillary, he talks about low energy Jeb Bush, he talks about the communist Bernie Sanders. He uses these various forms of mockery in order to fight his opponents. So we think the right-wing media, Fox News, uses mockery a massive amount. They have this massive arsenal of mockery that they can use and that they can report on. It's their territory. So what happens when the left-wing media doesn't do the same, when the left-wing media doesn't mock Trump? A few things. First of all, we think that we lose these large quantity of moderates, because we think that their only engagement with politics, which is through this comedic level, no thank you, comes from the right wing as opposed to the left wing, right? And that again, we characterize Jimmy Kimmel's probably not, if he's no longer mocking Trump, he's not going to go and turn into a serious discussion show. He's just going to mock something else and engage in some other form of comedy. The people who are going to be watching the comedy about Trump just end up watching that comedy about something else instead, because again, they're trying to get this respite from everyday life. So we think that in this case, the people who are talking about these moderates only have this engagement in comedy from the right-hand side, not the left-hand side of the political spectrum. Therefore, they end up biased because they're following a biased news source. The only way to win a meme war is to fight a meme war. Okay, Second thing that happens is that you get no legitimate response to the things that Trump is saying, right? And that, like, Trump has already lowered the bar of discourse a massive amount. The only way to fight that discourse is to engage with it on his level, right? When he says shit like, I never understood wind, like, windmills cause cancer, like, there's no legitimate response to that. There's no way of engaging with that legitimately and telling him, like, intelligently that he's wrong. He's just going to clap back with another statement about, like, wind being shit and messing up his hair. The only way to engage with that is probably to mock him for it, to tell him, no thank you, that, like, to just be entertaining about it, right? If you say dumb shit, you should probably be mocked for it. Third of all, we think that, like, even if this isn't the case, we think that, like you just end up with the serious discourse being drowned out by the mockery that Trump uses, and these intelligent conversations being drowned out. No, thank you. Why? Because the media wants clicks, the media wants views. How do they get this? They get this through comedy, by getting people to laugh, by getting people interested, by having clickbait media. And clickbait media is far more tailored to sound bites than it is to policies. No, thank you. So if the liberal media isn't, like, using these various sound bites too, then they just don't report on the liberal media. They just report on the sound bites that do exist, which are then only from the right. Therefore, you get this, like, right-wing mockery versus left-wing intelligence clash, which is just, like, you end up with, like, massive amounts of reporting on the mockery, and the mockery becomes far, far more popular than anything else does. So again, we think that if you reach even, like, the people who do engage on a deeper level, who do engage in politics through, like, the news and through reading these things, still probably end up with biased news from the right, because, like, that's what they hear about more, that's what gets them the clicks. Why do we think we need to specifically mock Trump? No, thank you. Simply, like, and not just anyone else or Republicans in general, specifically because he has a different voter base from, like, Republicans in general, right? And, like, Trump engages people who have never voted before in their lives, or people who traditionally voted Democrats, who are agreeing with the Gov on this. We think, like, in this regard, we have to mock specifically Trump in order to, like get people to, in order to take away from his support. It's not sufficient to mock anyone else. Let's then briefly do some rebuttal to CG and show why we beat them. I already took out their disabilities case by proving it's entirely symmetric. We're going to take out their case about lessening the US on the world stage, simply by saying, like, in terms of this regrets motion, we don't think it's really hurt the US as standing on the world stage to mock Trump, right? Like, Australia is going to take the money to fight their wildfires regardless of the size of Trump's hands. They don't really care about that if they're getting aid. The only way in which it would possibly compromise the US is when the US is trying to, like, assert dominance over countries, in which, like, they do this through, like, economic means or military means, which are still the same. We don't think it really matters what the media is saying about Trump, but even if it did, we're really unclear as to, like, why the US having less dominance over the world is necessarily a bad thing. We don't think that they justify that at all, but, like, in the long run as well, we think that even if respecting America is a good thing, the only way in order to gain that respect is probably to get rid of Trump, right? And this is what my entire speech is about, this is what my entire case is about. So at the point at which their case is, like, contingent on a claim that I spend, like, 7 minutes proving, we think we probably win this debate. I like to mock Trump, you do too. Let's just keep doing that. Thank you.
And that was Adam Malice. We will turn it over to Bobby Gums now from the University of Central Missouri, who will be closing the government bench as our government whip.
Okay. Oh, I need timer. Okay, let us begin. Sorry about that. Okay, so first I'm going to start out by addressing some of the arguments that we just heard from closing opposition, and then I'll present 3 really unique key questions for why the government bench is actually winning today's debate. First, I want to touch on one of the last things that we just heard from the member of opposition, and that is the fact that right now he believes that my partner and I are advocating when it comes to soft power and multilateralism for the United States to have more control over numerous things. We are not advocating for that whatsoever. We personally do not like it ourselves. What we are advocating for is the respect that we wish that our president had, but mocking is not actually doing what they are telling you it is doing, as the Prime Minister has proven numerous times, and my partner has talked about, which I will prove more when it goes into my questions. Second, I'd like to talk about the fact that they were saying we should at least have the option. We completely agree, but mocking Donald Trump has not actually done anything effective whatsoever. They stated that if you're not mocking Trump, then you're probably mocking someone else, but we're not regretting mockery, and something that we really need to look at is what mockery actually means. Light jokes are completely okay. It's always been like that in the status quo, as the government bench has proven time and time again, but what we need to realize is what's not okay is excessive, harmful rhetoric that has a direct impact on people outside of Donald Trump. There's always been satire in politics. It's a lighthearted. It's something that's meant to be. What it's not supposed to do is have trickle-down negative impacts that actually hurt the constituents of the United States. Let's move on to some of the voters that we need to look at in today's debate. First, we need to ask ourselves, what does it actually mean to regret? Our resolution is this House regrets the significant use of mockery of Donald Trump by the liberal media, and the government bench has been the only bench able to prove why we should regret this to begin with. Our second question is, what does mockery actually mean? This is the debate of mockery versus criticism. And third, we will look at which side is actually protecting the most amount of people. First, let's look towards what does it actually mean to regret. The government bench has been able to show numerous times that we can regret the liberal use of mockery, the liberal media mocking Donald Trump as much as they are in the status quo. We are not advocating for change, which is something that the opposition keeps telling us. Mockery is completely fine, but what we need to realize is that when it gets to a level that is harmful and making it so that our president isn't being taken seriously anywhere in the world, it's a problem. The fact that we came from the United States, Missouri, all the way here to even talk about Donald Trump is showing that the excessive use of mockery is taking a global impact that none of us are actually debating in today's debate until my partner stands up and brings up this issue. It's extremely important to look at. The fact that on an international scale, liberal media in the United States is having this large of an impact on the way that not only our president, but our entire country, our entire political system is viewed, is harmful in reality. We need to take that into consideration. Our second question that we need to look at is, what does mockery actually mean? There is a distinct difference between mockery and criticism. It is perfectly fine for someone who does awful things, as Donald Trump does, to be criticized. That is perfectly fine. What is not okay is when we see harmful rhetoric, such as the arguments that my partner brought up in our second point, that make it so that other people are being directly harmfully impacted. I'll get you at the bottom of this question, I promise, by the things that the liberal media is saying. There are direct impacts that the government bench has been able to bring out numerous times. Let's go back to the example that my partner gave about how Donald Trump is directly hurting intellectually disabled individuals because he is constantly portrayed as an adult who has the IQ of a child, which is actually something that a lot of people have to deal with, and we are putting a darker light on that than what's actually necessary, because those people can have fulfilling, really successful lives, and we're saying, oh, this is what our president acts like, and making it more negative and harmfully impacting those people in a way that they do not deserve. Yes, I will take your question.
Will you engage with my definition of mockery and how it is used to delegitimize harmful acts of Donald Trump?
Okay, yes, definitely. The way that you said delegitimization of Donald Trump. That's exactly what the mockery is. Mockery is a delegitimization of a person, but criticism is not. Criticism is that accountability that you guys were advocating for, and we want that as well. We don't want the mockery because that's doing less good. It's bad. We all know that. We've said it numerous times. Okay, thirdly, let's look towards our most important question that we have in today's debate. Which side protects the most amount of people? The first speaker in closing opposition tried to stand up and talk about moderates and how moderates are being affected by this. But what we need to realize is that on the government side, moderates are actually having a better chance because they're hearing these facts, because they're hearing this criticism. Also, we are able to regret mockery without taking it away. It can still exist, but the moderate problem isn't necessarily fixed as they said it would be. We need to realize that what they're advocating for didn't actually work in 2016, like the Prime Minister has already stated, and my partner has already stated. So why don't we stand up and try something different to make sure that we're actually advocating and having a better life for these people? I would rather stand up in front of all of you guys and regret the liberal mockery in a public space than take a step back and hide behind closed doors because mockeries always happen. Yeah, cool. It's better to stand up for what you believe in and fully regret something, and that's what today's resolution is. We are not advocating for change. We are saying we regret this because Donald Trump is a bad person. Donald Trump has hurt women. Donald Trump has hurt intellectually different individuals. What we need to realize is that in the grand scheme of things, the government side is the only side protecting literally anyone when it comes to today's debate, and that's really what's most important. Yes, you're second of two.
How do you engage with my articulation stating that whenever we seriously condemn Donald Trump for his actions and his rhetoric, it does nothing, but whenever we make a mockery, it actually opens up the field for more condemnation and a better life?
Yeah, my engagement with that is the fact that we've been having this sort of mockery, making a fool out of Donald Trump since before he was even elected. That didn't work. He's still in the White House. He's actually been able to gain a lot of steam and a lot more followers and constituents. And the fact that he is currently the GOP choice to be the Republican candidate for the 2020 election is showing that mockery is not working to begin with. So why keep trying something that's not working? That's the direct definition of insanity. Insanity is trying the same thing multiple times and expecting a different outcome every single time it happens. Why are we doing this? We're seeing that people are getting hurt the entire time that we just keep going out and mocking Donald Trump because it makes us feel better for a few split seconds. No, we are able to regret the mockery of Donald Trump because regretting is at least going out and being brave and taking up for other individuals. Mockery itself is not criticism, and we need to stop conflating those two definitions. I've proven that numerous times. And lastly, we need to think about people at large and not just necessarily the fact that, oh, it could possibly hold him accountable. This has not happened at all. It hasn't happened in the 4 years he's been in office, and it probably will not happen later on. Yes, mockery has always existed, satire has always existed, we completely agree with that, and we are not defending Donald Trump whatsoever. But what we are saying is that we can regret, as today's resolution states, because mockery of Donald Trump has been proven time and time not to work. Criticism is key to accountability. Criticism is okay, and criticism is actually reporting facts and not just trying to get a cheap laugh. And for these reasons, the government bench, especially closing government, is winning today's debate.
And that was Bobby Gums from the University of Central Missouri. Goodness. Closing out the government bench. We will now turn it over to Abhinav Matani, who will close off side opposition.
For a speech that does not exceed 7 minutes. Here, here.
Okay, so Donald Trump is an extremely divisive figure in modern-day American society. When you have a figure so worshipped by millions and millions of people and looked down upon by an arguably equal number of people, you have a personality perceived by the general population in two different ways. You have the left-wing liberal population that perceives him to be a villain, and you have the right-wing, including Trump, to perceive him or themselves to be the victim. We understand that this is a part of American society that is crucial, but contend that mockery actually helps within the structure of society that actually exists. So today in my whip speech, I'm going to attempt to do a few things. One, I'm going to further attempt to prove to you why the liberal media's mockery of Trump is actually a good thing that must be regretted, and I'm going to try and rebut whatever Op says, and also weigh Adam's extension that wins out over our opening and the rest of Gov. So what do you get out of CEO today then quickly? One, Adam proves to you that the increasing number of people who engage with politics on the surface level are the most important actors in this debate, and more significantly, who we care about in this debate. Secondly, Adam gives you the status quo situation about how Trump himself uses mockery as a weaponized instrument against the left, and why use of mockery serves as an essential counterbalance against this. Three, Adam gives you, when the left media doesn't do the same, he gives you the harms of bias and engagement that we have. So, firstly, we're going to move to OG. Out of OG, we get a few things. First, fine.
Engagement on the media, as Adam says, does not translate into votes. Can you please engage your analysis as to how giving the right momentum and angering people is the best way to ensure Trump gets all the votes?
Fine, well, I was about to do that. So, one, out of OG, we get one. They talk about how this undermines authority, and two, pushes supporters towards Trump, and how it flips the election base. We have a few responses to this. This nicely weighs up against what Adam says with respect to how people who are most likely to engage are the ones who do it on the surface level. These people are essentially not likely to engage in serious political discourse. It's the mockery that pushes these people towards actually engaging on some level with politics. So we also understand that mockery in itself can essentially lead to serious political discourse. Mockery and serious political discourse are mutually exclusive, or try to engage with this in whatever they said. And however, Adam's analysis essentially proves and impacts it in a far better way. We don't see how they're counterfactual about how serious political discourse, must exist, cannot exist in the status quo itself. Furthermore, even if we talk about how we can't get serious discourse, and they actually prove that to us, Top Half and CG make this a mockery against criticism debate. The other three teams actually disengage with what this debate is actually about. We believe this debate is fundamentally about whether mockery in itself is an inherent good, and therefore we win because of what Adam proves to you. No, thank you. So essentially, going to CG quickly, they give us two things. One, they talk about multilateralism and how, the whole delegitimization, argument. Adam does engage with this. Furthermore, I'm going to try to, even discredit it to an even greater extent. One, citizens of other countries are, one, not actively engaged in the political process of the United States of America. This is crucial because the actual background of this motion does exist within the United States of America, and essentially what we're trying to talk about is whether mockery of Trump in itself is an inherent good, and we believe the United States of America is the key background of this. Secondly, we believe that these citizens of other countries are not... Go on.
Okay, so doesn't the way that Donald Trump, isn't the way that he's viewed on a global scale impacting American citizens? How come we're able to disregard the way that other political leaders view him just because it's not directly a domestic American issue?
We're not discrediting the way people view Trump. All we're trying to say is that citizens of other countries they don't necessarily care enough to actually buy into such discourse. They see this as memes. Sure, they might discredit America. However, this is not impact America on a global scale to the greatest extent, as Adam has proven. Furthermore, we also believe that world leaders do not essentially buy into such mockery to the greatest extent. Even if America's stand was delegitimized on a certain scale, it would only be behind the back with a few people actually trying to do this. And we believe that America's standing and America's historical standing essentially outweighs any harms that this may prove to us. Secondly, they talk about, so what's left of their case then, because Adam dealt with a lot of it, is they talked about how this might advocate for violence in some sense. People are very likely to not buy into this violence when they recognize that this is actually mockery, which isn't hard to do. And people understand that it is actually mockery and not an actual portrayal of things. They're not more likely not to buy into it as opposed to doing so. Furthermore, the only way to actually impact America's global standing, which ties back into their point, is to get rid of Trump. And CEO does that with Adam's analysis and extension. Furthermore, we believe that their point about intellectual disabilities does fall out of the debate because of the following. If they aren't mocking Trump, they would essentially be mocking someone else. So we believe that there's some harms, marginal harms in terms of disabled people. However, they'll just do that with respect to someone else instead of Trump. This is because, one, mockery of disabled people and mentally challenged people existed before the time of Trump itself. It manifests itself in daily life in classrooms, etc. When you don't mock Trump, you mock someone else. It is not more likely that mocking Trump will essentially accentuate the problem that exists within the scheme of society as a whole right now, and therefore we believe that essentially just falls out of the debate. Yeah.
It happened before, but when we all agree in this room that uniquely more people are paying attention to the mockery of Donald Trump and how we portray Donald Trump, how are we not getting more people seeing these forms of intellectual disabilities being portrayed in negative lights?
Okay, so essentially that's exactly what I just said. It is not more likely that mocking Trump leads to the problem actually accentuating. The problem has existed for a long time in society, and we believe fundamentally that digressing mockery isn't the right way to go. So just quickly bringing in into the whole scheme of things, they talk about women's rights and the Me Too movement existing. We agree with the impacts O provides. However, we believe that we've substantially provided more reasons why this motion should fail. Secondly, O attempts to engage in their POIs in various parts of their extension with how people engage through memes, etc. But Adam does two things crucially with respect to this. One, Adam impacts us and fills in certain links that O omits and provides you an altogether nevertheless new mechanism for which this would work. And secondly, Adam provides a stronger world and scenarios in which O's material actually falls in. Rather, O can only be credited for the material when they fall in and under Adam's scheme of what actually has been presented. So finally, we believe that we win this debate because of the fact that we prove that mockery is inherent good within itself and not opposed to political discourse as the rest of the teams have made it. We win solely on the metric that we prove that we must not regret mockery of Donald Trump, and therefore, CEO.
And that concludes the debate over the resolution. This House regrets the liberal media's significant use of mockery of Donald Trump. So now what happens is the four adjudicators will dismiss themselves from the room, and their job is to essentially decide who won the debate. And so while they are making that decision, Jack and I are going to talk to you a little bit about the debate. We may pull in one of our new friends, Nat, who is the president of Edinburgh University's Debate Society, to get a little bit of thoughts of his own thoughts on the debate as well. But Jack, how do you think it went tonight?
I think it went pretty well. It's obvious that the students from Edinburgh have a lot to say about the American political process, and specifically about how Donald Trump and the way that the media treats Donald Trump, has an impact on the body politic. Kind of interesting.
I thought it was extremely fascinating, but there were some really interesting moments dealing with mockery in general.
Yeah.
And also mockery of the
Right.
president and how those two collide or don't in some of the senses.
Yeah.
But I have a specific question for you. So as a communication scholar, one who studies the media, one who studies messages and the construction of messages and the dissemination of messages and the impact of messages. So one thing that I was thinking about as this entire debate was going on is the ethical responsibility of the media. Knowing that the media's entire job revolves around increasing their consumers, or increasing the amount of consumers who are taking in their message. So how does mockery fall into this whole idea of the ethical responsibility of the media?
Well, I think that's one of the essential, questions that you have to deal with in a debate like this. Is it really ethical? Is it really something that an ethical media needs to be engaged in? Certainly, I think mockery from constituents and from other political figures, those kinds of things. We've always had yellow journalism. We've always had mockery in the political process. But I think over the last, probably decade, maybe it started with, George Bush, certainly Clinton to a certain extent. The media has gotten more and more into the business of mockery instead of really reporting facts, really doing deep analysis of what the issues are. And we're getting more and more sound bites. We're getting more and more mockery. And when you have the left and the right essentially doing the same thing, where does somebody go to find out what the facts are? Where does somebody go to get an intelligent, rational discussion of some of the issues that the students brought up in the debate, like, Obamacare, or like the economy, or any of these issues, the alt-right? Politics then becomes a caricature. And it's really hard to guide a country. It's really hard to understand the direction of a country if all we do is mock what's going on. So I think there is an ethical dilemma there. It's almost, I guess, a race to the bottom, and
Right.
I just don't think that's very good politics.
Right.
Yeah.
But I honestly think that side opposition brought up some really good points talking about targeting the non-politically engaged constituents.
Yeah.
And honestly, they're right. Those individuals are going to gravitate more towards humorous messages, towards mockery, and it does, to a certain extent, at least expose them to political messages. But does it do it in the right light?
It's of course you want people to vote, obviously. We know that less than 50% of registered voters actually go out and vote. You want people to vote, but if people are voting based on a meme, if people are voting based on a joke or a Saturday Night Live skit, I'm not really sure that those are the people that I really want electing the leadership of the country. I think the fact that people don't want to engage in politics because they're, as the opposition said, well, they're too busy, life is too stressful, they just want to relax and not have to worry about it. I don't think that's a good reason to say, well, let's again race to the bottom, let's find a way to get them involved without any kind of thoughtful engagement into what's actually going on. I just don't think it's good politics. I think it's bad for the country.
Right. I agree. I think it's also really interesting to think about the impact that this soundbite culture has
Yeah.
on fake news as well.
Yeah, I mean, and you're a communication scholar as well. I mean, we talk about those kinds of things and how you package messages and how you try to have the biggest impact that you can with the messages that you transmit. But the soundbite culture, we used to have 60-second commercials and then 30-second commercials, and now we have 10-second commercials, and now and of course we always have had people that look at headlines and don't read what comes underneath the headline. We've always had that. But I think people are just disengaging from the political process. I think they're not thinking things through as much as they used to. And I think that mockery and sound bites have made it easier for them to do that, you know. And anything that makes it easier to disengage from the responsibility that the American citizenry has in voting and participating in government, I think it's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. One of the other really interesting thoughts that came up on SideGov was this whole idea of soft power and how mockery could potentially impact the United States' credibility on a more global scale. What do you think about that argument?
I'm not a political scientist, but I think that the office of the president has to be taken seriously. There has to be an amount of respect there. You have to feel that the president of the United States speaks on behalf of the citizenry, speaks on behalf of the nation, and has the support of Congress and the support of the voting constituency, the support of the military, those kinds of things. And when you mock the president, regardless of whether it's Trump or anybody else, I mean, Obama was mocked in some ways, and that I think that hurt him on the international stage from time to time. Certainly Bush and Clinton were mocked, and it made it more difficult for them to broker trade deals. It made it more difficult for them to be taken seriously when they talked about, military interventionism. I mean, I just think I think it's a bad thing to mock, and I think it does have an impact on how other world leaders view the United States, how they view Donald Trump, and I don't think that it's something that's going to be helpful in the long run.
Right, I would agree.
Yeah.
Well, one president that we are certainly not going to mock is the president of Edinburgh Debate Society. So we are going to have him join us. Jack, thank you so much for your feedback, your thoughts, and commentary. But we're going to invite Nat to join in. Come on in.
Thank you.
So it's super exciting to have a student join us. And Nat has been absolutely amazing in helping us get this set up. He's been wonderful in hosting us. Edinburgh is always one of our favorite places to come. So, Nat, thank you so much for doing this for all of us.
Thanks so much for coming. It's great to have you guys here. I thought the debate was really excellent. And again, I think you guys are putting in a load of really hard work behind the scenes to get this all running. So, yeah, it's really great to see all this and see a great debate. So, yeah thank you so much.
So what do you think were some of the key arguments that were kind of brought up throughout the entire debate? What do you think the debate surrounds?
So I think the debate is primarily one around narratives and when you're presenting issues in the media, whether that be through mockery or through serious discourse, you're creating a narrative around how important or what that issue looks like in terms of the minds of the voters. So I think that debate then, in terms of how it played out here, it sort of became about that, whether that was the narratives that told about the US on the global stage or with particular kinds of supporters. I think it was really interesting to see every single different team engage with a sort of slightly different version of that and sort of look at and analyze in a lot of really interesting and detailed ways how those narratives play out for people. When you, for example, only create a narrative around a political issue about Donald Trump being and you only mock it, or you use a significant amount of mockery, then the narrative you create as a result of that is maybe harmful, and that if you as a particular kind of person in America have a high stake in this election, you probably I don't know, that's a particularly serious issue to you, and if it's only being mocked by people who like don't have that same kind of stake in that issue, then maybe that's a point that you disengage with that election. So yeah, like there's all kinds of ways you can look at this debate, and I think it's primarily one that's about narrative. So it's really cool to see that like engaged on a variety of different levels in this debate.
I would agree, and I think it's really interesting coming from the perspective of students here as well. And from what I understand, you all were a little bit more pivotal in choosing this resolution, which I thought was kind of interesting. But one thing that I've noticed in all of our trips over here is students seem to have a much more well-rounded and perhaps well-versed view of the international scale of what's happening on the international scene, especially in regards to politics. So I thought it was very interesting. Could you talk to us a little bit about how and why you think that you can what gets you to the point where you have such a broad-based understanding of like the geopolitical climate?
So I think a few reasons. Obviously, like the last few years in particular have been like very tumultuous in terms of politics, like everywhere. Like I guess notably in the US, but also in the UK with like everything that's been going on recently with referendum around Brexit. So I think there was already sort of an initial point that a lot of young people were just getting involved with politics generally, and I think at a certain point, like once people have got into politics, at a certain point they are just going to sort of continue broadening their understanding as they talk to more people. Like I think my experience and my like viewpoint before university was like quite limited, so I think just going to university and being like exposed to more people enabled me to like broaden my viewpoint in a lot of really significant ways. And I think that's, I think again, not even just people who like go to university, but I just think generally it's harder to I think to escape politics a bit now. So like especially when like big things are happening in the same year, like people are willing to like tune into the American election, for example. Like, even though that's not something that affects us like directly, it's still something that we have like big stakes in, and especially when like we see similarities in like movements between like liberal or left wing or right wing candidates, like whoever you support, like you see I think a growing amount of like international cooperation or like solidarity between movements of a particular ideology. So like I know like on like the liberal or like left wing end of the spectrum here, you'll see a lot of people in the UK who are like really keenly following like the differences between like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders going into the primaries, and like really paying attention to like the details of all these systems around the world. So yeah, like it's something that even if it doesn't affect us, like we really care about.
Right. I love how politically savvy you all are. So just a few questions about, because I think what's really fascinating is this is not a style of debate that we get to do too often in the States. So in regards to the student body of your debate society, what do they typically study? Are they like political science people? What are they looking at?
I honestly think you get like a big mix. So like, I mean, just to sort of illustrate the dichotomy, as it were, like I'm a linguistics student, and my flatmate, the treasurer of the debate society, is a math and physics student. So like you already get that kind of like range across there through like humanities, social sciences. Obviously you get like economics and law students, like and then STEM, science, math students. Like you honestly do just get quite a range of people. Like I'd imagine if you were to do a survey, you'd probably get like a high proportion of like politics and philosophy students. Like I bet it, but again, like I don't think that's like a demographic that's like super clear. Like again, it's good because you do just get a wide range of students engaging with it, which is really, really good.
Right. So what does exposure to debate look like at the lower levels? So like elementary school, we would say pre-K through 12. That's probably not what you call it here.
So yeah, like the again, there's just slight differences in between the English system and the Scottish system, but broadly you have like your primary school from sort of age 4 or 5 to age 11, and then you have secondary school from 11 to about 16 or 18, depending. So I think if debating exists at your school, it's probably going to be in like secondary school. So once people sort of hit 11, so between the ages of 11 and 18. But I think there's a bit of an issue that's kind of pervasive in British schooling in terms of like the divide between state-funded schools and private schools, in terms of like the accessibility for something like debating is often quite a high bar. That you have money for like competitions on weekends, like you have to like buy a minibus to and like put money into like training. So it's often something that like if there's not other support that you're able to access just requires money, which
Sure.
means that there's kind of an access gap there, which is something like we try really hard with. So like we put on a couple of schools level competitions every year, and we try our best to make that like accessible not just to like local private schools but also to like local state schools as well. Like we often put on like workshops for them and like do some outreach there, like offer them discounts for registration and stuff. So like hopefully it's a trend that will like continue and get better. So like it's not just something that is like a hobby for like rich kids who go to private schools. It can be something for like everybody, no matter where you are.
Right, sure. Well, in the States, we have several different formats of debate that we engage in. At UCM, there's two in particular, and that is a one-on-one, very policy-heavy format of debate.
Yeah, I think I've seen this.
Lincoln Douglas, so super research intense. They tend to speak very quickly.
I've seen those videos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we also do parliamentary, which is just two teams, so 4 debaters. So I love this style, but it's a big debate. Like it takes a lot of time. And it takes a little bit of a different skill set. So what do you think are the biggest benefits to engaging in BP style debate?
I think the two things that are key about BP that you don't get with other styles is the short prep. So in a competitive setting, you'll have about 15 minutes usually to prepare once you get the motion, and also the fact that you have 2 teams on each bench. So you have an opening government, a closing government, an opening opposition, and a closing opposition. The few things I think this does is with the short prep, I think like it might sound weird in terms of like proving that things are true, but specifically not relying on like facts and data, I actually think enables you to like learn to rely more on making intuitive, plausible arguments that are like analytically proven, rather than just being like, here's some data that may or may not prove my point. Because obviously there's like, I don't know, again, issues that you can have with data in terms of representing that. So I think being able to develop a skill set that is like a bit more spontaneous and is more reliant on proving those analytical links, I think is really good. And then with the difference between opening and closing teams, I think that enables you to really get into the depths of an issue. Like when you have a second set of teams on each bench that are specifically rewarded for generating new content, it means that you like just see like really interesting corners and bits of debates that you wouldn't have thought of, because obviously the opening teams will sort of cover the basics, as it were, of any particular motion. So then there's like a higher burden on the closing teams to really think deep and wide about where this debate can affect and change things in the world, whatever it is. So I think it's just a really good thing in terms of like exploring issues to their fullest extent. So yeah, that's what I like about BP.
Okay, nice. So I'm assuming that you debate pretty extensively. All right. So what is your preferred spot on the bench?
Well, my least favorite is definitely Prime Minister. I don't like going first.
Okay.
There's too much, I think a bit too much pressure, and you have like a big burden in Prime Minister to like lay out the debate. I much prefer a slightly more reactive position. So I like whip speaking on either bench, or I like being the deputy speaker in top half.
Okay.
So the ability to sort of take a step back and like look at the framing of the debate and being responsive to teams is I think where I'm most comfortable.
Okay, very nice. Can you tell us the importance and the significance behind the whip speech?
Yeah, the whip speech I think is something that is a bit, when people are new to the format, they think it's I think the position that's hardest for people to grasp, because it seems quite odd in terms of what it does, because you're not, like in the competitive rules of BP, you're not allowed to necessarily bring like new constructive material in the whip speech. So what your job is not just to like, essentially it's giving like a biased judge like call, where you go through the debate and just sort of sum up all these issues. So the importance of it then is like thinking about a debate on a more strategic level. So I think like engaging with like the clash points, or like where teams have engaged with each other, and being able to really pick that apart, I think helps you get to the core of those issues in a really specific kind of way. So in terms of understanding the debate, I think the whip is the position that can sort of best do that and help you understand that in that kind of detail.
Sure. Okay. I always find the bottom half super interesting, and talk about needing to be super reactive as well. You know, if you think about prepping arguments, and then if the top half takes all of your arguments, what do you do?
This does happen. So it's called turf burning, sort of colloquially, when the opening team will just sort of, again, you can kind of tell occasionally when it's going to happen if you go into a room at competition and you just see the opening team and you're like, okay, you know they're going to be really good. So again, you can kind of develop strategies to think of like particularly obscure or detailed things, but in the event that the opening team do just take like everything, I mean, there are a couple of things you can do, because ultimately the debate in a competitive setting is strategic. So even if you don't think you'll be able to beat your opening half, you've still got two other teams in the debate you can beat. So you could spend your entire speech just going through literally every single point that the other team's made and just taking them out like systematically. It's called like essentially a rebuttal extension, where you don't bring anything new and you just do rebuttal. So like being able to be that kind of reactive is hard. It's one of the hardest skills to sort of get used to in debating, but like is just really important if you want to do well, especially in closing. And I think it's just something you do kind of just get used to, especially when you develop like a partnership dynamic. So like you have to be able to like trust your partner to like go with you on something, because you'll have prepared something in prep. And if you have that kind of trust with your partner where you'll be able to like, no, okay, let's change this completely and go something else, that's quite hard. But once you get there, it like is a real boost to your ability to win from closing half.
Sure. Okay. All right. So how would you encourage the top half to stay engaged during the bottom half of the debate? I know a lot of times when we're preparing our students, they get a little stressed out when they're in the prime minister position, because they think, okay, well, after my speech, there are so many speeches and I'm just sitting here. So how do you tell the PM to stay engaged? No, you're good.
It's a bit of a it can be a tricky one. Like again, I think this is part of the reason why I don't like PM so much. So you kind of you do your speech and then the whole debate just sort of falls away from you and you can't really do much. But what you can do, and what is sort of strategically advisable at the very least, is to give points of information specifically to the team on the other diagonal. So like if you're an opening government, give PYs to closing, and vice versa. So because obviously they're the teams you have the least time to react to. So if you can sort of give the judges some idea of how you're engaging with them, it'll just be more points in your credit. But also I just think, especially in opening government, to sort of try and just preempt where that engagement will be. So like, don't think outside the box for opening government. Just run the simple thing and just think about what this debate looks like, where the clash points are. And I think if you just do that really solidly, it becomes quite hard for the debate to run away from you. Because if you just do the thing, the simple thing really well, then that should get you far.
Sure. Yeah. And that's one of the things I absolutely love about this format, is it is about just solid, rational, realistic. I don't even want to use the word simple there, but I mean simple arguments that just make sense. I think sometimes we get a little wrapped up in presenting squirrely cases that don't make a whole lot of sense or impacting things out, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah. That is something you do in closing if you just have nothing else. Just run something completely wacky, and you're like, okay, screw it.
Okay, like, we'll just go this direction.
We'll do it live.
You know, I mean, at least you'd be memorable, right?
Yeah.
Right.
True,
okay.
True.
Okay. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. Tell us a little bit about how your society has been doing in the competitive scene this year.
Okay, so we've been doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Like I think we've been on the up for a few years. Obviously, Edinburgh's been like, it's quite a historic society, so it's done consistently quite well. But like, we're usually able to send quite a large contingent of teams to any given competition. So we'll have like our very competitive teams of our best speakers, but also have spots for development speakers who are maybe like freshers or like new speakers. So even if they're not getting breaks and wins in like the open great category, there might be like a novice final in a competition. Sure. So we aim for sort of success across the board, not just for like the top speakers, but also the novice speakers. So like, I don't know, what are recent examples? What is it today? So we were at the Scottish Mace, which is the Scottish Championships.
Oh yeah.
Which is a few weeks ago now, and so the top 8 teams after the rounds broke, the break to semi-finals, and 3 of the 8 teams that broke were from Edinburgh, including the top breaking team, which was me and my partner Jason.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
congratulations.
Thank you. We didn't make it through the semi-finals, so it's not that much. It's not that much of a mic drop. But yeah.
Still.
But yeah, there was an Edinburgh team that made it through to the final. So yeah, in terms of the Scottish Championships, we did well there.
Yeah.
We've also done pretty well at the European Championships. A couple of years ago, we got teams that got through to the out rounds there. So yeah, like Edinburgh does like consistently pretty well throughout competitive stuff. I think we're sort of neck and neck, as it were, with Glasgow, who are usually a bit more sort of dominant in terms of. Oh, I've got to wrap up. But yeah, And again, we don't really like Glasgow aren't our rivals per se. They're our sort of like comrades who will try and do well alongside. But yeah,
We totally get that. We get that.
sure.
Well, Nat, this has been really fun getting to talk to you.
Yeah,
Again,
thank you.
so much for all the information and being such a wonderful host. We had such a blast.
My pleasure.
So we will get ready to turn it back into the chamber so we can hear the final call for the debate.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
All right.
Can't wait.
Sometimes in the United States, while they do it, they just pack up.
That was a great debate, guys. Great job. It was pretty hard to adjudicate. Obviously, it took us a little bit of time to figure out what position everyone was in, but we have reached a decision, and so we'll start with the one. R1 is going to closing government. R2 is going to closing opposition. R3 is going to opening government, and R4 is going to closing. Opening opposition. If you guys do have any questions, just come ask us individually, but it was a really great debate, and I'm glad that we got to adjudicate. Great job, guys.
Okay, well, that concludes tonight's debate against Edinburgh University. And just to let everybody know of the final call of the adjudicators, the first was given to closing government. The second place position was given to closing opposition. Third was awarded to opening government, and fourth was awarded to opening opposition. So a great debate across the board, some really solid argumentation all the way down the table on both sides. And again, we had just an amazing time here at Edinburgh University, as usual, against a very solid team and a fantastic group of students.
Yeah, great.
So tune in, keep an eye on our Facebook page and all of our updates. We will hopefully be doing some wrap-up shows as we continue on our journey. We're actually leaving tomorrow morning for St. Andrews, and next up on our agenda is debating Dundee University in just a few days. So keep an eye on our feed, and we'll make sure to keep you posted. Have a great rest of the day.